The shuttle dropped through the clouds of Valith Prime like a stone falling into dark water. Eli Marin pressed his face against the small window and watched the fortress moon grow larger beneath him. Towers of black stone rose from the surface like teeth. Training fields stretched between them, glowing faintly with anti-gravity platforms and weapons ranges that could be seen from orbit. The Galactic Union Joint Military Academy, the most feared military school in 300 star systems. And Eli was the only human who had ever been accepted. He was 22 years old. He was lean and average height. He had no claws, no armor plating, no extra limbs, and no cybernetic enhancements. Back on Earth, he had been a paramedic. He had spent his days pulling broken people out of car wrecks and talking them through the worst moments of their lives. Now he was here, surrounded by aliens who could crush steel with their bare hands. The doors opened, and 40 cadets stepped out onto the black stone platform. Eli looked around at his new classmates and felt very, very small. To his left stood a Grethki named Torvon. The alien looked like a bear that had been carved from granite. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick brown fur and arms that could snap a human spine like a dry branch. He was already ranked first in the cohort before training had even started. To his right skittered a Solori named Zael Vin. She was insectoid, with sharp limbs and compound eyes that reflected the light like broken glass. She moved with a speed that made Eli dizzy just watching her. She glanced at him once, then looked away, as if she had seen nothing worth remembering. Behind them came Corvali cadets with metal woven into their bones, Peluvian engineers with 6 fingers on each hand, and a silent Lithovari named Ur, whose skin glowed with soft bioluminescent patterns that shifted like a living mood ring. And then there was Eli, plain, soft, human. A shadow fell over all of them. Sergeant Dravenot Kahl walked onto the platform, and every cadet went silent. He was Rokari, 7 feet of scaled muscle, with bone plates running down his skull, and 4 powerful arms folded across his chest. His eyes were yellow and cold, like a predator that had never known fear. He had trained soldiers for 40 years. He had never lost a fight. The cadets at the academy called him the Mercy Grinder, and the name was not a joke. Kahl looked over the new cohort the way a butcher looks at meat. "You are not soldiers." His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "You are soft. You are weak. You are filled with the habits of your homeworlds, and those habits will kill you." He walked slowly down the line, his 4 arms clasped behind his back. He stopped in front of Torvon and nodded once. He passed the Corvali cadets without expression. He paused at Jael and tilted his head, studying her speed-built frame with mild approval. Then he reached Eli. Kahl looked down at the human the way someone might look at an insect that had crawled onto their dinner plate. He leaned closer. His breath smelled like iron and smoke. "What are you?" Kahl asked. "Cadet Eli Marin, Sergeant. Earth, Sol System." "Human." Kahl said the word like it tasted bad. "Your species has been in the Union for 12 years. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no speed, no enhanced senses. You are, by every measurement that matters, the weakest species to ever send a cadet to this academy." Eli said nothing. He kept his eyes forward and his back straight. Kahl straightened up and addressed the entire cohort. "Let me make something clear to all of you. War does not care about your feelings. Your enemy will not pause because you are tired. Your enemy will not stop because you are bleeding. In my cohort, there is no mercy. Not for you, not from you. If you cannot live by that rule, leave now." Nobody moved. "Good," Kahl said. "Training begins in 1 hour." The first week nearly killed Eli. not in a poetic way, in a real, physical, his body was shutting down way. The morning runs were designed for species with longer legs, stronger hearts, and lungs that processed oxygen 3 times faster than human lungs. Eli finished last every single day. The combat drills paired him against cadets who outweighed him by hundreds of pounds. He was thrown, hit, slammed into walls, and knocked unconscious twice. The shooting ranges were calibrated for eyes that could see in infrared, ultraviolet, or both. Eli's plain human eyes struggled with targets that other cadets hit without thinking. Every night, he dragged himself back to his bunk, bruised and bleeding and exhausted, and every night he pulled out a small leather journal and wrote in it. He wrote down everything, what he had learned, what had hurt him, what he had noticed about the other cadets. Their fighting styles, their habits, their weaknesses. Zale watched him from the upper bunk one night. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Notes," Eli replied. "About what?" "Everything." She clicked her mandibles in the celery expression of confusion. "Why? You are ranked last. Notes will not change that." Eli looked up at her and smiled. That was something else the aliens found strange about him. He smiled too much. He smiled when he was tired. He smiled when Call humiliated him in front of the entire cohort, calling him the species that survives by begging. The smile unsettled them because they could not understand what was behind it. "Maybe not," Eli said, "but I like to understand things." The next morning, Zale's weapon jammed during target practice. The Solori energy rifle had a calibration flaw that made it pull to the left after every third shot. She cursed and fumbled with it, falling behind the rest of the cadets. Eli walked over without being asked. He took the rifle, studied it for a moment, adjusted 2 settings based on something he had read the night before, and handed it back. "Try now," he said. She fired 3 shots. All 3 hit center. He was already walking away, heading toward his own lane, where he would finish last again. At the end of the second week, Kal announced the Crucible Trials, the Academy's brutal midterm combat evaluation. A 72-hour survival exercise in the Ashen Maw, a massive simulated war zone filled with combat drones, traps, and environmental hazards. Squads of 6. Last squad standing wins. "No mercy, cadets," Kal said, his yellow eyes sweeping over them like searchlights. "If you show it, you fail. If you expect it, you die." That night, Eli sat on his bunk and wrote 1 line in his journal. He underlined it twice. He doesn't know what that word means yet. Then he closed the journal, turned off the light, and slept the deep, still sleep of someone who was not afraid of what was coming. The Ashen Maw was not a training ground. It was a nightmare that someone had built on purpose. 200 square kilometers of jungle, desert, and ruined cities spread across the surface of Valeth Prime's southern continent. The air was thick with heat and the smell of burning metal. Combat drones patrolled the skies in packs, their red sensors sweeping the ground like the eyes of hungry animals. The environmental hazards changed every few hours. Acid rain in the jungle sector, sandstorms in the desert, collapsing buildings in the city ruins. 72 hours, 6 cadets per squad. Last squad standing wins the Crucible Trials. Eli stood with his assigned squad on the drop platform and looked at the faces around him. Squad 9, the Reject Squad. Zael Vin stood to his left, her compound eyes scanning the terrain below with sharp focus. She was fast and smart, but too rigid in her thinking. She liked plans that followed straight lines, and war never moved in straight lines. Das, a Peluvian engineer, stood behind her. He was small and nervous, with 6 fingers that never stopped fidgeting. He was brilliant with machines, but fell apart under pressure. During the last combat drill, he had frozen for 11 seconds when a drone fired at him. In real combat, 11 seconds was a lifetime. Two Corvallis cadets, Ren and Savi, stood together, with their arms crossed. They had cybernetic enhancements wired into their bones and muscles, but they had barely passed their qualifications. They were strong, but lacked discipline, and they knew they were on the weakest squad. Their faces showed it. And then there was Ur. The Lithavari cadet was tall and thin, with smooth gray skin that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Ur did not speak. Lithavari communicated through patterns of color and light that rippled across their bodies. Most cadets ignored Ur because they could not understand the light language. Eli had spent 3 nights learning the basic patterns from a translation guide he had found in the Academy library. Sergeant Call had assigned this squad personally. Eli knew it was not random. Call had put the 6 lowest-ranked cadets together and pointed them at the most dangerous war zone in the Academy. He wanted to watch them break. From the command tower, high above the Ashenmaw, Call sat in a chair, surrounded by screens, and watched the squads deploy. He turned to another instructor and said, "Squad 9 will not last 24 hours. The other instructor nodded. "The human? A waste of a slot," Call said. The dropship released Squad 9 into the jungle sector at dawn. They hit the ground hard, and the clock started. Within the first 6 hours, everything went wrong. They were moving through dense vegetation when the ambush hit. 8 combat drones dropped from the canopy and opened fire. Ren and Savi froze, their enhanced reflexes useless when their brains could not decide what to do. Das screamed and dove behind a rock, curling into a ball. Zale shouted orders, but her commands were too complex, too structured for the chaos of the moment. Eli did not shout. He did not freeze. He did not panic. Something shifted behind his eyes. It was the same thing that had switched on inside him 1,000 times before, in the back of ambulances and on the floors of emergency rooms. The calm, the cold, clear focus that came when everything around him was falling apart and someone needed to make decisions right now. "Or," he said, his voice steady and low. "Flash bright. Full spectrum. 3 seconds." Or's skin erupted in blinding white light. The drone's sensors overloaded for a brief moment, their targeting systems scrambling to recalibrate. "Das, the tree to your right. There's a power junction in the root system. Cut it." Das looked at him with wide, terrified eyes, but something in Eli's voice, the calm, the certainty, made him move. He crawled to the tree, found the junction, and cut it with his engineering tool. A section of the drone network went dark. "Zale, flanking arc, 40 degrees left. Move now." Zale did not argue. She ran. Her Cellori speed turned her into a blur as she circled the drones and struck from the side, taking out 2 with precise shots. "Ren, Savi, push forward, draw fire, trust your armor." The Corvallis cadets looked at each other. Then they roared and charged. The drones focused on them, their shots sparking off cybernetic plating, and in that moment, Eli stepped out from cover and shot the last 3 drones with calm, measured aim. Silence fell over the jungle. Das was shaking. Ren was bleeding from a graze on his arm. Zale's breathing was fast and hard. But they were alive. All 6 of them. Eli looked at his squad. "That was bad," he said. "Next time will be better." It was. And so was the time after that. Over the next 36 hours, something began to happen that the instructors in the command tower had never seen before. Eli did not just lead Squad 9. He rebuilt them. He sat with Das each night and talked him through his fear, not with speeches or tough words, but by asking him questions. What scared him most? What did he know he was good at? How could they use that? By the second day, Das was building traps and sensor jammers from scrap drone parts, and his hands had stopped shaking. He learned Or's light language well enough to give commands through color signals. Or, who had been invisible and ignored for weeks, became their secret weapon, a living communication system that no other squad could intercept or decode. He trained Ren and Savi to use their cybernetic strength not as a blunt hammer, but as a shield. He positioned them as the squad's wall, drawing fire and absorbing hits while the others moved. He studied Jael's tactical mind and showed her how to bend her rigid plans. The plan is a starting point, he told her. After that, you read the moment. And he studied the other squads. Every encounter, every distant sound of combat, every pattern of drone movement. Eli watched, listened, and wrote in his journal. He mapped how Squad 3's Solori scouts always drifted to the left. He noted that Squad 7 fell apart whenever their leader was separated. He tracked Squad 1's aggressive push-and-destroy pattern and memorized its rhythm like a heartbeat. In the command tower, Call watched the screens with growing unease. Squad 9 was climbing the rankings. They had survived ambush after ambush, cleared 3 objectives, and they had done it without a single squad member being eliminated. Increase their difficulty, Call ordered. Double the drones. Cut their supply drops. Push them into the hardest terrain. The other instructors exchanged glances, but obeyed. Squad 9 was hit with twice the opposition, half the resources, and the worst ground in the Ashen Maw. They were pushed into the desert sector, where the heat could cook an unprotected body in hours, and then driven into the ruined city, where buildings collapsed without warning. Eli did not complain. He did not question why their path was harder than everyone else's. He adapted. He found water in the desert by following animal tracks. He used the collapsing buildings as weapons, luring drones into structures that Das had rigged to fall. He turned every disadvantage into a tool. By the end of the second day, Squad 9 was ranked 3rd. By the start of the 3rd day, they were ranked 2nd. And then the final phase began. The elimination round, squad against squad, last one standing. Eli gathered his team in the shadow of a crumbling tower. Their faces were tired and dirty, but their eyes were sharp. They trusted him now, not because he was the strongest or the fastest, because he saw them, each of them, and he made them better than they thought they could be. Squad 1 is out there, Zael said. Torvan's squad. They have not lost a single member. Eli nodded. I know. They are the best squad in the cohort. I know that too. So what do we do? Eli looked at each of them. Zael, Das, Or, Ren, Savi. His squad. His people. We disappear. And then we take them apart. On the far side of the ruined city, Torvan cracked his massive knuckles and scanned the darkness. His squad had already torn through 2 other teams. He was looking for Squad 9 now, looking for the human. When I find him, Torvan growled, it ends. But the city was silent. Squad 9 was already gone, melted into the shadows like smoke. And somewhere in those shadows, Eli Marin smiled. The night cycle fell over the Ashen Maw like a black curtain. The artificial sky above the war zone dimmed to a deep purple, and the temperature dropped fast. In the ruined city sector, broken buildings stood like the bones of dead giants. Wind moved through empty windows and made sounds that could have been whispers or warnings. 5 squads remained at the start of the elimination round. Within 4 hours, only 3 were left. Squad 9 had not fired a single shot. In the command tower, Sergeant Call leaned forward in his chair and stared at the screens. His forearms were tense. His yellow eyes moved from camera to camera, searching. Where are they? He asked. The monitoring officer shook her head. No energy signatures, no heat traces, no movement detected. Squad 9 has gone completely dark. Call said nothing. In 40 years of running the Crucible trials, he had never lost a squad on the sensors. Squads fought. Squads ran. Squads hid badly and were found. No squad had ever simply vanished, But that was exactly what Eli had told them to do. Deep inside the ruined city, Squad 9 moved like shadows. Eli had ordered all weapons powered down, all communication devices off, all energy-emitting equipment stored in shielded packs that Das had built from scavenged drone parts. They moved through the rubble in silence, communicating only through Ur's bioluminescent signals, dim flashes of color that no sensor in the Ashen Maw was designed to detect. Eli had spent 2 days watching, 2 days listening, 2 days filling his journal with the patterns and habits of every squad in the trial. Now he was using all of it. He knew that Squad 3's Solori scouts always moved to the left when they searched a new area. It was instinct, built into their species. So he planted false heat signatures on the left side of the commercial district, using battery packs from destroyed drones. Squad 3 followed the trail straight into Squad 6's patrol route. The two squads collided in the dark, and by the time they realized neither was their real enemy, both had taken heavy losses. Squad 3 was eliminated. Squad 6 limped away with only 2 members. Eli found Squad 6 an hour later. He did not attack them. He cut off their supply line by collapsing a bridge they needed to cross. Then he waited. 2 hours later, exhausted and out of water, Squad 6 surrendered to the monitoring system. 3 squads down. Only Squad 1 and Squad 9 remained. In the command tower, the instructors were silent. One of them pulled up Squad 9's combat record for the elimination round and read it twice to make sure she was not making a mistake. 0 direct engagements, she said quietly. They have eliminated 3 squads without fighting any of them. Kal's jaw tightened. He watched the screens, searching for the human. But the cameras showed only empty streets and dark buildings. He is not fighting a war, Kal said slowly. He is conducting one. On the ground, Torvan was losing his patience. The massive Grethki had spent 4 hours hunting Squad 9, and he had found nothing. No tracks, no signals, no signs that anyone was even in the city. His squad was the strongest in the cohort. 5 elite fighters who had smashed through every opponent with raw power. But power needed a target, and there was no target. His squad members were getting nervous. They jumped at sounds. They checked their backs every few seconds. They flinched when the wind knocked loose stones from the buildings above. Torvan snarled at them. Focus, they are 6 weak cadets. The human cannot hide forever. But Eli was not hiding. And there is a difference. At the 11th hour of the night cycle, Eli made his move. Zale circled wide through the eastern ruins and found Squad 1's communication relay, a small device mounted on a rooftop that let them coordinate across the city. She disabled it with a single precise cut. Squad 1's headsets went dead. Torvan grabbed at his earpiece. Static. He roared an order to regroup, but his voice only carried so far in the twisting streets. Ur climbed to the 3rd floor of a collapsed parking structure and began flashing patterns of light across the city. To Squad 1, it looked like signals from another squad. Movement, coordinates, false positions. Torvan's team split up, chasing phantoms. Das activated 3 rigged drone cores he had planted at key intersections. They were not weapons. They were noisemakers, bursts of energy signatures that made the monitoring system light up like a festival. To Squad 1, it looked like enemies everywhere and nowhere. Ren and Savvy sealed the exits of a narrow corridor of collapsed buildings, creating a funnel, a path that looked like the safest route through the chaos. Torvan took the path. Of course he did. He was aggressive, direct, and angry. Everything Eli had expected. The corridor narrowed, the walls closed in, the ceiling dropped, and in this tight, dark space, Torvan's enormous size became a cage instead of an advantage. Eli was waiting at the end. He stood alone in the darkness, no weapon raised, just standing there, his battered armor scratched and dented, his face calm. Torvald saw him and charged. The fight was not beautiful. It was not elegant. It was brutal and ugly, and it happened in a space so tight that technique barely mattered. Torvald swung first. His massive fist caught Eli in the ribs and sent him crashing into a wall. Something cracked. Eli gasped, tasted blood, and rolled sideways as Torvald's second swing shattered the concrete where his head had been. Eli came up fast and struck Torvald in the knee joint, one of the few weak points in Grethki anatomy that he had spent nights studying in his journal. Torvald stumbled. Eli hit the same spot again, and again. Torvald backhanded him across the corridor. Eli's body spun through the air and hit the ground hard. His left arm bent at a wrong angle, broken. Pain screamed through his nervous system. Real pain, not dulled by any biological mechanism, because humans did not have one. He got up. Torvald stared at him. The human was bleeding from his mouth, his nose, a deep gash above his right eye. His left arm hung useless at his side. His breathing was ragged and wet, and he was smiling. "Stay down," Torvald said. There was something in his voice that had not been there before, something closer to confusion. Eli shook his head. He moved forward. They fought for 12 more minutes. Eli could not match Torvald's strength, so he did not try. He dodged. He redirected. He let Torvald swing at air and tire himself out. Every time Torvald connected, Eli went down, and every time he got back up. He hit the same weak points, the knee, the elbow joints, the gap in the Grethki's neck plating, over and over, with his one working hand, until Torvald's movements became slower, clumsier, heavier. In the command tower, every instructor was standing. Kal was gripping the edge of the console. On the screen, the human kept getting up. Broken and bleeding, and he kept getting up. Torvald threw one final punch. It was slow, exhausted. Eli stepped inside the swing, drove his fist into the nerve cluster beneath Torvald's jaw, and the massive Grethki dropped to his knees. His eyes were glazed. His body was done. Eli stood over him. Blood dripped from his chin onto the dark floor. His broken arm trembled at his side. He could barely breathe. He reached out his good hand and offered it to Torvald. Kal's voice exploded through the arena speakers. "Cadet Marin, I said no mercy." Eli looked up. He found the camera mounted in the corner of the corridor and stared directly into it. He was breathing hard. His voice was quiet, but the microphones picked up every word. "This is no mercy, Sergeant." He paused, swallowed blood, kept his eyes on the camera. Mercy would have been letting him quit when he was tired. Mercy would have been ending this early. I made him fight until he had nothing left. I made him use everything he had, and I took it all away from him, piece by piece, and I did not stop. The Grethki leaned on him, barely conscious, and Eli held his weight despite his own broken body. "You want to know what no mercy looks like, Sergeant? It looks like this. It looks like someone who will not stop, and will not let you stop, and when it is over, still has enough left to help you stand." Silence in the command tower. Every screen showed the same image. A broken, bleeding human holding up an alien 3 times his size in a dark corridor. Kal sat down slowly. His 4 arms unfolded and rested on the console. The other instructors looked at him, waiting for the sharp comment, the dismissal, the growl of disapproval. It did not come. Kal stared at the screen with an expression none of them had ever seen on his face in 40 years. The medical wing of the academy was white and quiet, a sharp contrast to the black stone and violence of everything outside it. Recovery pods lined the walls in rows, each one filled with green healing fluid that could mend broken bones in hours and seal wounds that would take weeks to heal on their own. Eli Marin floated in Pod 7. His eyes were closed. Tubes ran into his arms and chest, feeding medicine and nutrients into his bloodstream, while the fluid did its work on the outside. The display screen beside his pod listed his injuries in cold clinical text. Broken left radius and ulna, 3 fractured ribs, torn ligaments in both knees, deep laceration above the right eye, requiring 62 stitches, bruised kidneys, minor internal bleeding, concussion grade 2. 14 separate injuries. He had fought through all of them. Dr. Veshin, a Rakari physician with gentle hands and tired eyes, stood beside the pod and read the list for the 3rd time. He was not reading it because he did not understand it. He was reading it because he could not believe it. Zael stood next to him. She had come straight from the debrief, still wearing her battered armor, and she had not left since. "Will he recover?" she asked. "Yes," Veshin said. "His body is already healing. Humans have remarkable tissue regeneration for a species with no enhanced biology." He paused and looked at Zael with an expression she could not read. "But I need you to understand something, Cadet." "What?" "His species does not have pain suppression glands." Zael's compound eyes flickered. Among the celery and most galactic species, the body had chemical systems that dulled extreme pain during combat. It was a survival mechanism. When the damage reached a certain point, the brain released chemicals that numbed the body and allowed the individual to keep functioning. "He does not have that?" Zael asked. "Humans have a mild adrenaline response that can partially mask pain for short periods. But it is nothing like what you or I experience. It fades quickly, and the pain returns in full." Veshin looked at the floating figure in the pod. During that fight with Cadet Torvan, he felt everything, every broken bone, every torn muscle, every impact, all of it, at full intensity for the entire duration. Zael said nothing for a long time. She stood beside the pod and watched the human sleep, and something shifted behind her eyes. She had spent weeks thinking of him as soft, fragile, emotional, a lesser species playing at being a soldier. She did not think that anymore. When Eli woke, she was still there. He blinked at the ceiling, then turned his head and saw her sitting in the chair beside his pod. "How long?" he asked. His voice was rough. 9 hours. "Did we win?" "You know we did." That same strange smile that had unsettled her for weeks. She understood it now. It was not the smile of someone who did not feel pain. It was the smile of someone who felt all of it and chose to keep going anyway. "Can I ask you something?" Zael said. "Sure." "During training in the first week, I was cold to you. I dismissed you. I told the others you did not belong here. But when my weapon jammed, you helped me without hesitation. Why?" Eli looked at her for a moment. His eyes were calm and warm. The same eyes that had stared down Torvan in a dark corridor 12 hours ago. "You needed help," he said. "That is enough of a reason." Zael's mandibles clicked softly. Among the Cellori, it was the sound of someone who did not have words for what they felt. 3 floors above the medical wing, in a private room with no windows, Sergeant Call sat alone at his desk. The room was dark, except for the blue glow of a data screen. On the screen was Eli Marin's service file, and beside it, the Galactic Union species profile for humans. Call had read species profiles for hundreds of alien races. He had studied the biology, psychology, and combat capabilities of every species that had ever sent a cadet to the academy. It was part of his job. He knew which species were fast, which were strong, which were dangerous, and which were not worth his time. He had read the human profile once before, months ago, when Eli's application came through. He had skimmed it and dismissed it. Average in every category. Nothing remarkable. Now he read it again. Slowly, every word. The first section was about human evolution. Call read about how humans had developed on a planet with large, powerful predators that were faster, stronger, and deadlier than them. Humans had no fangs, no claws, no armor, no venom. They should have been eaten and forgotten, one more failed species on a violent world. But they did not die, because humans were persistent predators. They did not chase their prey to catch it quickly. They chased it for hours, for days. They followed it across plains and through forests, walking and running at a steady pace, never stopping, never giving up, until the animal's body simply shut down from exhaustion. The prey would collapse, its muscles destroyed by its own heat and effort, and the humans would walk up to it calmly and finish what they had started. They won by refusing to stop. Call sat back in his chair. His forearms were still. He read further. Human history, and what he found there made him go cold in a way that combat never had. Humans had survived ice ages that covered their world in frozen death. They had survived plagues that killed half their population and rebuilt from the ashes. They had split the atom and nearly destroyed themselves, and then pulled back from the edge at the last moment. They had fought each other in wars so vast and so terrible that entire continents burned, and then they had built hospitals and schools on the same ground where millions had died. Their history was not a story of peace. It was a story of relentless, stubborn, bloody survival against odds that should have ended them 100 times over. But there was another section. Call almost missed it, buried in the cultural notes at the end of the profile. He read it, and then he read it again. Records of humans running into burning buildings to rescue strangers they had never met. Soldiers carrying wounded enemies off the battlefield and treating their injuries. Medics who crawled through gunfire to reach people who had been trying to kill them minutes before. Humans who gave their own food to starving prisoners of war. Humans who threw their bodies over children during explosions. Humans who died so that others, sometimes even their enemies, could live. Call closed the file. He sat in the dark for a long time. He understood now. He understood what Eli had meant in that corridor, standing over Torvon with a broken arm and blood on his face. Human no mercy was not cruelty. It was not the absence of feeling. It was the opposite. It was fighting with everything you had, enduring every pain, pushing past every limit. And then when the battle was over and your enemy was on the ground, reaching down and pulling them back to their feet. Not because you were soft, because you were strong enough to destroy them and still chose to save them. Call stood up. He left his quarters and walked down to the medical wing. The halls were empty. His footsteps echoed on the stone floor. He found Eli sitting up in his pod, the healing fluid drained, bandages wrapped around his ribs and arm. The human looked up when the massive Rokari sergeant entered the room. There was no fear in his eyes. There never had been. They looked at each other in silence for a moment. "I have trained 10,000 soldiers," Call said. His voice was low, without its usual sharpness. "Warriors from 100 species. I have faced the most dangerous creatures the galaxy has ever produced, and I have beaten all of them." He paused. "I have never been afraid of a single one, until now." Eli tilted his head slightly. "Afraid?" Call took a slow breath through his scaled nostrils. His yellow eyes were steady, and for the first time, they held something that looked like respect. "Any species can learn to kill without mercy," he said. "Many species do. They turn off their feelings and become empty and efficient. That is common. That is easy." He took a step closer. "Your species kills without mercy, and then weeps for what it has done. You carry the full weight of every life you take, and it does not slow you down. It does not make you hesitate. It makes you more careful, more precise, more relentless. You feel everything, and you fight anyway." He straightened to his full height. "That is not weakness, Cadet Naren. That is the most terrifying thing in this galaxy." The room was quiet. Eli held the sergeant's gaze and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The next morning, Call submitted a recommendation to the Academy's Command Council. Cadet Eli Marin was to be transferred to the Vanguard program, the elite leadership track reserved for cadets expected to command in real combat. It was the first time in the history of the Galactic Union Joint Military Academy that a human had ever been nominated. The recommendation form required a single line of justification. Cal wrote 4 words. He understands no mercy. 6 months changed everything and nothing. Eli Marin graduated at the top of the Vanguard program, not by the widest margin and not without struggle. The program was designed to break leaders, not just soldiers, and it tested things that the Crucible never touched: strategy under political pressure, the ethics of sacrifice, the weight of sending others to die. Eli did not find these lessons easy. He found them necessary. Squad 9 stayed together, even after the Crucible. That was unusual. Squads were temporary by design, meant to be shuffled and reformed so cadets learned to work with anyone. But Squad 9 refused. Zale filed the paperwork herself, requesting permanent assignment as Eli's second-in-command. Das transferred his engineering focus to combat systems and became the squad's technical specialist. Orr, still silent, still glowing, became their communications officer, the only one in the Academy who operated on a frequency no enemy could intercept. Ren and Savi grew into disciplined, reliable shields who no longer froze under fire. And Torvan came back. He walked into Eli's quarters 3 weeks after the Crucible, still carrying the slight limp from their fight. The massive Grethke stood in the doorway and said nothing for a long time. "I have never lost a fight," Torvan finally said. "I know," Eli replied. "I have never been carried off a battlefield by the person who beat me." "I know that too." Torvan's dark eyes studied the human, this small, soft, breakable creature who had taken everything Torvan could give and then offered his hand. "I want to transfer to your unit," Torvan said. "When you graduate, when you get your command, I want to fight beside you." Eli looked up from his journal. "Why?" "Because you showed me something I did not know existed, strength that does not need to prove itself by leaving others on the ground. I want to learn how to do that." Eli closed his journal and smiled. "Welcome to Squad 9. The graduation ceremony was held in the Grand Hall of the Academy, a cathedral-sized chamber carved from a single piece of volcanic glass. 5,000 cadets from 200 species stood in perfect formation on the polished floor. Their armor gleamed under the pale blue lights that hung from the ceiling like cold stars. Behind them sat families, diplomats, military officials, and representatives from across the Galactic Union. The commandant of the Academy, a withered ancient Corvali general named Dothran, whose cybernetic body was more machine than flesh, gave the traditional address from the central podium. He spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of the long and bloody history of the Union's wars. His voice was thin, but carried to every corner of the hall. When he finished, he stepped back. The ceremony was supposed to continue with the reading of honors and assignments. That was the protocol. That was what always happened. But Sergeant Dravenok Kal walked to the podium. 5,000 cadets went rigid. Whispers rippled through the hall and died. Kal had never spoken at a graduation, not once in 40 years. The commandant looked surprised, but did not stop him. One did not stop Kal. The sergeant stood at the podium and looked out over the sea of faces. His yellow eyes moved slowly across the formation, and the hall was so silent that the cadets could hear his breathing. "I have spent my life teaching soldiers one lesson," Kal began. His voice was deep and rough, and it filled the hall like thunder. "No mercy. I have said those words 10,000 times. I believed I understood them better than anyone alive." He paused. "I was wrong." The silence deepened. Cadets exchanged glances. Kal never admitted error. Kal never showed doubt. This was not the sergeant they knew. 6 months ago, I placed the weakest cadets in this academy into one squad and sent them into the crucible trials. I did this to watch them fail. I did this because I believed weakness should be exposed and discarded. Among those cadets was a human, a species I considered soft, emotional, and unfit for war. Kaal's eyes found Eli in the formation. The human stood between Zale and Torvon, his back straight, his face calm. That human led his squad to victory. He did not do it with strength. He did not do it with speed. He did not do it with any of the things I have spent my career teaching cadets to value. He did it with something I had never considered a weapon. Kaal gripped the edges of the podium with all four hands. He understood the people around him. He saw what each of them needed, and he gave it to them. He saw what each of them could become. He turned the weakest squad in this academy into a force that no one could stop. Not because he made them harder, but because he made them whole. The hall was motionless. 5,000 soldiers from 200 worlds listened to the Mercy Grinder speak words that none of them had ever imagined hearing from his mouth. After the crucible, I read the human species profile, all of it, and I learned something that I want every one of you to hear. Kaal straightened to his full height. Humans evolved on a world that should have killed them. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom, no wings. The predators on their planet were larger, stronger, and faster. By every rule of nature, they should have gone extinct. But they did not. Because when a human sets its eyes on something, prey, an enemy, a goal, it doesn't stop. Their ancestors chased animals across open plains for days, not hours, days, running and walking without rest until the animal's body gave out and it collapsed. Humans did not need to be the fastest. They simply needed to be the last ones still moving. He let that settle over the hall. But that is not what frightened me. Speed can be matched. Endurance can be trained. What frightened me is what I found in the rest of their history. Kaal's voice dropped lower. The cadets leaned forward without realizing it. Humans run into burning buildings to save people they have never met. Their soldiers carry wounded enemies to safety and bandage wounds made by their own weapons. Their medics crawl through fire to reach the people who were trying to kill them moments before. They wage wars so terrible that their own world burns. And when the war is over, they build hospitals on the ashes. He looked at Eli again, and when the fighting is done, they weep for every life they have taken. They carry the weight of it, all of it, and it does not break them. It does not slow them. It makes them more careful with the next life they hold in their hands. Kaal's voice rose, and it rang off the glass walls of the grand hall. I told Cadet Marin that there was no mercy in my cohort. He showed me that humans have always understood mercy better than any of us. They understand it because they know exactly what it costs. They know the price of violence and the price of kindness, and they choose kindness anyway, even when they have every right to choose otherwise. I have spent my life teaching soldiers to be hard. This human taught me that the hardest thing in the universe is to be relentless and still be kind. He stepped back from the podium. Remember that. The hall erupted. 5,000 cadets slammed their fists against their chest plates in the galactic military salute. The sound was like a thunderstorm. It lasted for a long time. In the formation, Zale's hand found Eli's and squeezed it once. Torvon stood at his back like a mountain. Das was crying. Or's skin blazed with patterns of gold and white that the Lithavari only showed in moments of deep pride. Ren and Savi stood at attention with their jaws tight and their eyes bright. Eli stood among them, his face still and his eyes wet, and he said nothing at all. Years passed. Wars came, as wars always do. On a burning battlefield at the edge of Union space, Commander Eli Marin led a joint species strike force against an enemy fleet that outnumbered them 3-1. His soldiers, Selori, Grethki, Korvali, Rokari, Lithavari, Peluvian, and human, fought with a coordination and ferocity that the enemy had never encountered. They moved like a single organism, each species covering the others, each weakness shielded by someone else's strength. The battle lasted 11 hours. It was ugly and brutal, and many good soldiers did not survive it. But the line held. The enemy broke, and when it was over, the survivors crawled out of burning wreckage and collapsed on the scorched ground. The enemy survivors were pulled from the rubble by Union medics. They were beaten, broken, and terrified. They expected execution, or at best, cold imprisonment. Commander Marin was the first one to reach them. He knelt beside a wounded enemy officer, opened his canteen, and held water to the alien's cracked lips. The officer stared at him. "You destroyed us," he whispered. "Yes," Eli said quietly. "And now it is over. Drink." A young cadet, a Peluvian, fresh from the academy, serving her first tour, watched this from 30 meters away. She had just spent 11 hours in the worst fighting of her life, and now the commander who had led them through it was giving water to the enemy. She turned to the officer beside her. It was Jael, older now, scarred from a dozen campaigns, her compound eyes still sharp and watchful. "How does he do it?" the young cadet asked. Her voice was shaking. "He fought like a demon out there. I saw him. And now he is doing that. How?" Jael watched Eli for a long moment. He was kneeling in the dust, bandaging an enemy soldier's wound with the same steady hands that had fired weapons hours before. He looked tired. He looked sad. He did not look conflicted. Jael smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible on her insectoid face, but it was real. "He is human," she said. "It is what they are." The young cadet shook her head slowly, not in disagreement, but in wonder. Across the galaxy they had been called soft, fragile, emotional, unremarkable, a species of average strength, average speed, average senses, with no natural weapons and no biological advantages worth measuring. For 12 years, the Galactic Union had looked at humanity and seen nothing special. But the galaxy was learning. Slowly, painfully, and with a strange and dawning reverence, it was learning the truth. The most dangerous creature in the universe was not the one that felt nothing. It was not the one with the sharpest claws, or the thickest armor, or the fastest reflexes. It was not the one that could kill without hesitation. It was the one that felt everything, every wound, every loss, every death, every consequence, and fought anyway. The one that carried the full crushing weight of what it had done and did not look away. The one that could break you with one hand and heal you with the other, and never saw a contradiction between the two. That was what no mercy truly meant. Not the absence of compassion, but the refusal to stop, for anything, for anyone, for any reason. And the stubborn, unbreakable insistence on being kind when the fighting was done. The galaxy had underestimated them. It would not make that mistake again.